Today we are seeing an attack against the American people by the law enforcement arm of the executive branch of our federal government. Many of these law enforcement agencies have used the power granted to them by Congress to establish rules as a means of circumventing legislative writ. Join me to discuss how Congress is delegating one of their primary powers, the power to make law, into the hands of bureaucrats in this episode of Office of the Patriot. Hello, and welcome to the Office of the Patriot. In this office, I try to make sense out of the nonsense of the progressive left. If you are a subscriber, thank you for your continued viewership. It is appreciated. If you are a returning viewer, please take a moment to hit the subscribe button so you don't miss any future presentations. And if you're a first-time visitor to my channel, well, congratulations on finding it. It's usually buried by the YouTube algorithm. However, I hope you find the content worth coming back for. My name is Myron Ybarra, and I'm your host. If you're watching this channel, it's a pretty fair bet that you understand the basic structure of our federal government. We have the executive branch, headed by the president, who oversees federal government agencies, is the head of state, and the commander-in-chief of U.S. Armed Forces. The legislative branch, who enacts law, controls the purse strings of our government, has subpoena power, and establishes government agencies under the necessary and proper clause of Article 1, Section 8 of the U.S. Constitution. And finally, you have the judicial branch, who's responsible for interpreting law, applying law to individual cases, and ruling on whether laws that are enacted through the legislative process violate the Constitution and/or due process. Today's focus is going to center on Congress and what I believe to be a gross dereliction of their duty by way of delegating their authority over the executive branch agencies to the agencies themselves. But before I get any further into this presentation, I would like to get your take. What limits would you put on government agencies' ability to self-regulate? Please take a moment to comment below. When our government was formed, the founders, our fathers, understood that there was going to be a need for administrative agencies to carry out the work needed to establish and solidify our government. They also knew that while there is a separation of powers, branches will naturally overlap because each action in one branch will cause a reaction in another. In this case, Congress's power to establish, empower, regulate, and fund government agencies that are overseen by the executive branch. And while the executive branch controls these agencies, Congress does maintain oversight through its use of congressional committees. The process of this requires both houses of Congress to review and approve the formation of the agency, also known as bicameralism. If both houses agree, it's sent to the president for signature, also known as presentment. The president does have the power of veto. However, if both houses have overwhelming support, they can override the president's veto. Some of the tools that Congress uses to oversee government government agencies include design, funding, delegation of authority, and procedural controls on all federal agency decision-making authority. Now, this is not to say that the president doesn't have any say in the formation of a new federal agency or department. To the contrary, under the Appointments Clause, Congress is limited on controlling who will run each of these departments. That responsibility falls to the president under the framework of administrative control of the agency. In essence, the buck stops with the president of the United States on who's getting hired and if or when they're getting fired when it comes to positions in the agency where the person will have administrative authority, so not regular employees. Congress also has the authority to delegate power to the agency or department to set policy, establish its own legislative rules, enforce the law within its own area of expertise, and adjudicate claims. In fact, Congress doesn't just have this authority during the formation of the agency, it maintains this power throughout the agency's lifetime. In some cases, Congress will act to put time limits on specific powers these agencies wield, sometimes referred to as sunshine stipulations, or they only allow these agencies to have certain authority under certain conditions. And this behavior specifically should be fresh in everyone's mind. But the most interesting component of Congress's ability to delegate authority to federal agencies is the limits Congress has under the non-delegation doctrine. Yes, you did hear that correctly. Congress has a non-delegation doctrine that has its roots in the separation of powers principles. Stay with me here. The United States Constitution is the source of authority that grants Congress legislative power, the power to establish law. The Constitution does not grant this power to bureaucratic agencies. The authority to enact law rests solely on the bicameral power of the legislative branch of our government. Unfortunately, we are not seeing that happen today. Many federal agencies are guilty of this, establishing rules that have the same force and effect as law. And you know who they are. They usually have three-letter titles and frequently use peace officers to enforce their rules under the guise of safety. As an example, ATF rule, also known as factoring criteria for firearms with stabilizing braces, is in effect a law that carries financial penalties as well as potential jail time for people who violate it. According to DOJ press release dated 1/13/23, the Attorney General directed the ATF to address the issue of stabilizing braces to, quote, keep our community safe from gun violence. I sure feel a lot safer knowing I can't have a stabilizing brace on my pistol. However, there are a couple of problems with this rule, other than the fact that these ATF morons actually enacted it. First, it bypasses constitutional protections that prohibit making something illegal that was once legal. This is called ex post facto. And ex post facto is expressly prohibited by the United States Constitution under Article 1, Section 9. These bastards get away with it, though, because it's not considered a law because it did not go through the legislative process. Again, a violation of this rule carries the same weight and effect as a violation of law. Next, it also appears that it violates the non-delegation doctrine, specifically because it does carry the same weight as law. This is why I believe Congress is derelict in their duty to intervene and nullify this rule by the ATF and pretty much any other agency. What's confusing and upsetting is that it appears that our current Congress, where Republicans maintain the majority, is unwilling to right this wrong by the ATF. Congress can go in and amend the power of the ATF or any other agency by removing their ability to enact rules that have a direct effect on liberty of U.S. citizens without legislative review or due process. Now, I understand that Congress has a lot on its plate right now with the impending federal default. However, Congress needs to go back and look at all of the agencies it has empowered with the ability to enact rules that affect liberty of U.S. citizens. Because one day we may get a more radical president than bumbling Joe Biden. That president will recognize that the agency he or she oversees can enact law under the guise of rules to remove rights from Americans, making Congress all but obsolete. The idea of Congress is the representation of the people of the U.S. in government by the people for the people. If there's no Congress, then there's no democracy, and thus no free United States. Well, that concludes this episode of Office of the Patriot. If you enjoyed what was presented, please take the time to like, subscribe, and share my channel on your social media. It is appreciated. And as always, have a great day and stay safe out there.